When you start doing more technical riding ruts and hills and getting stuck on your bike, you reach a point where being able to hop the front wheel around and progress that into doing a pivot turn is really, really helpful. So today we're going to learn to do pivot turns. Welcome back to MiniTip Monday. Pivot turns are a pretty technical skill set that starts with the baseline of being able to hop the front wheel from one side to the other a little bit. Essentially, all a pivot turn is being able to hop the front wheel really high, get it towards the balance point and direct the bike in the other direction. Obviously, that's a really technical skill. So today we're going to learn to do this on a dirt bike, mostly because doing it on an adventure bike is terrifying. It's not something that I've ever really got to the point where I'm comfortable enough to try. So we're going to learn to do it on a dirt bike. I'm going to jump onto the bike now, put the GoPro on and talk you through the process of going from not being able to get the front wheel off the ground to doing a pivot turn. It probably won't happen as quickly as I explain it in this video. It might take a little bit of practice, but hopefully you get the idea. Before we start doing any front wheel hops or pivot turns, there's a few little things and theories that you need to go through. The first one is to find a piece of ground that is fit for learning to do this. Once you get better at it, you can do it in more complicated places. But right now I have a relatively good grip environment. We've got some mud with a bit of moisture in it that really helps to learn this. Learning it on pea gravel, not super easy. Secondly, the ground isn't quite flat here. It's nearly flat, but I'm in a really shallow rut, which makes the bike a bit lower, and it gives me some high ground to put my foot on. That allows me to create even more separation between myself and the bike. It gives me a bit more height effectively, and it makes learning this much easier. The second part of that theory is understanding the processes that we're going to go through. I made a video not that long ago which was about learning to rock the bike using the clutch and throttle backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. That principle of feeding the clutch out and timing it with a little throttle and repeating that motion again and again is exactly what you need for doing a pivot turn or even hopping the front wheel a little bit left and right. We're going to time those two things with a little bounce on the suspension. When you do that, the front wheel will come up and then it's a case of just getting comfortable with what's going on. Before we do anything involving the clutch, throttle or engine, we've got two more things to learn. The first is to effectively bounce the suspension, the forks, so that we can use the rebound action of the fork. So when you compress it, it comes back up. We can use that rebounding action and time that with the throttle and the clutch to get some lift. That's the first step. The second step is to create some separation between us and the bike, exactly the same as we did when we did spin turns, so that you can let the bike move and you can control your own balance. So the first part of this is our nice effective bounce. Now you can do this without using a brake, but it's not as effective because you can see there, the bike is moving forwards and backwards all the time. You can do it against the back brake, that works quite well. Or you can do it against the front brake, which works extra well. So ideally you would do it against the front brake, but in some situations, say if you're on an uphill and you're trying to do this, against the back brake works nicer. In some situations, especially if you're trying to turn right, you can't use the brakes as easily. So you have to learn that process a little bit. Today, we're going to do it against the front brake because that's the easiest way to learn to do this. Now, bouncing the fork against the front brake is a relatively straightforward process. I got my one foot on the ground, my other foot on the foot peg. I'm going to hold the front brake on and I'm going to push on the forks. But it's important when I go to this position that I lock my arms strong and use my body weight pushing the fork down rather than trying to just do it with strength. My arms are quite strong and locked rather than pushing, and my body weight is pushing into it. And then I can get that nice rocking backwards motion And that rocking backwards motion is what allows the front wheel to come up. The next part is to learn to do that same process, but with my bum off the seat and my weight on the foot that's on the ground. When we do the pivot turn, we're always going to turn around our foot that's on the ground, the same as we did when we did a spin turn. So front brake on, bounce it, perfect. From there, the process of hopping the front wheel is to start the bike up, find the bite point with the clutch, bounce, and as the bounce comes back up, you feed a little bit of clutch out, give it a little turn of the throttle, and when you're high enough, you pull the clutch back in to basically take the situation back under control. It's quite important when you do this process as well that the throttle rolls on. If you start with quite a lot of revs, you'll break traction at the rear wheel as you feed the clutch out, and you won't get any lift. You need it to grip to get the front wheel to pick up. So we start with really low revs, and you feed it out and roll the throttle on as the fork uncompresses. Let's start the bike up. So I like to use one finger to do this so that I have a good grip on the handlebars. I find the bite point with the clutch. One finger on the front brake as well, because again, it allows me to be a bit more finessed with the throttle. So bounce, uncompress. There's no strength involved in this. That's kind of part of the point. You can see and hear, hopefully, that the revs are never very high. The lower the revs are when you do this, the more grip you're going to get and the easier it's going to be. A little addition to that makes it a little bit safer and a little bit more precise that I personally really like to do, and I think this comes into pivot turns a little bit more and wheelies and so on when you get more advanced. I like to cover the back brake when I do this and use the brake to control the motion a little bit. So as I come off and I pivot up, if I need to stop it, I'll just give it a little dab of the back brake. It's not essential, but it's something that's worth keeping in mind if you are taking this to more difficult places or trying to be a bit more precise with it. Once you start to get comfortable with hopping the front wheel from one place to another, small hops, the steps into a pivot turn are mostly about getting more comfortable with the front wheel being higher. I tend to use my body going backwards to pull the front wheel up and use the separation between me and the seat to let the bike come up quite straight towards me. Once it's in that position, the bike will quite naturally fall towards the side that your foot is on the ground. So here I've got my left foot on the ground, so when the front wheel comes up, it will pivot towards the left. And what makes it a good pivot turn is you keeping it up there at the balance point. Typically what I find is that as I initiate the pivot turn and I get the front wheel up, I then feed the clutch out a little bit to keep it at the level that I want. And it's a really gentle motion. Like when you find it up there near the balance point, it doesn't take much to change that attitude. So gently feeding the clutch out a little bit will keep the front wheel high and let it stay high and long enough to come all the way around. I'll give you a quick demonstration of what that looks like. Hopefully it starts to explain it and you can get out there and get practicing. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this video about how to do pivot turns. As I said right back at the start, learning to do a pivot turn is not a 4-minute exercise. You're not going to do it as quickly as I explained in this video, but hopefully it starts to give you the idea of the techniques you need to use to get the front wheel off the ground. That process of using the clutch and the throttle to lift the front wheel is identical to doing this while moving, but a few other things change. If you've enjoyed this video and you want to see more MiniTip Mondays, this is a series that we do first and foremost for our Patreon members. It comes out there a long time before it comes out anywhere else. If you want to see more of those, click the link in the description below. We also do a bunch of other really cool things. The graphics kit that's on my bike is available for a few other models now. We also sell the riding kit that we really believe in and other stuff in our online shop. You can find the link to that in the description below as well. And otherwise, remember, life's better when you're riding.